I am Liz Donatelli.
And I'm historical romance author Elizabeth Everett.
We are Unchaperoned on Reader Seeks Romance channel. Unchaperoned engages historical romance authors in thoughtful discussions about topics and issues relevant to historical romance fiction. Most historical romance readers consume romance novels set in 19th century Britain. They are intimately familiar with the London ballroom etiquette of the Regency Era and the strict moral codes of Victorian England. But what was happening across the pond in America? Today, we explore romance novels set in the Gilded Age, a period in American history that coincided with the late Victorian era. What exactly is the Gilded Age? What did romance and courtship look like in Gilded America? And what do Gilded Age romance novels offer readers that Regency and Victorian era romances do not? Let's meet our unchaperoned guests. FELICIA GROSSMAN is the author of historical romance, usually featuring Jewish protagonists. Her road trip romance, Dalliances Devotion, is set during the early Gilded Age in the eastern United States. JOANNA SHUPE is a USA Today best-selling historical romance author. Her Gilded Age romance series set in New York City include The Fifth Avenue Rebels, Uptown Girls, The 400, and the Knickerbocker Club. Harper St. George is the author of sexy historical romances. Her London-based series, The Gilded Age Heiresses, features love matches between wealthy Americans and members of the British upper class. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hello, Liz. How are you?
I'm doing swell. And yourself?
Swell as well.
Now we have to begin every episode with that. We've just created a moment.
So welcome. We are obviously unchaperoned. So whatever we get up to in this episode, I take no responsibility for it. So I'm going to start with you, Harper, because you have jumped time periods. You have written a series of Viking romances. Mm-hmm. And you are now writing a series of Gilded Age romances. And so I want to talk a little bit about your series in general, your Gilded Age series in general, and the gorgeous covers, and why you set in the time. But I'm interested first in the fact that you switched, my goodness, like couple centuries. Like what was a pretty big wild hop.
1,000 years. I really like research. That's what draws me to historical romance. And I love the escapism as a reader of historical romance because, you get a new time period that you may not be that familiar with as a reader. And you have these love stories and adventures. And that's what drew me to the Viking era. I think the adventures. Also, it's sort of this area. I mean, we have a lot of research about it, but it's really where legend meets history. So you can bring in a lot of real stuff that happened, but you can let your imagination run wild too, because you're not, not everything is written down. It's not like we have all these diaries every day and newspapers. So there's a lot more freedom there. And I really enjoy the alpha hero and romance. So that's why I went to Viking to start with. But also, I tend to jump around in my reading. Like I'll read romance, thrillers. And just to keep myself interested, I have to change time periods too. And I really have always been fascinated by the Victorian era. I really didn't know what Gilded Age was all about. So I started researching more, pretty much like what you said, Liz, like what's happening in America at this time, It's not, I don't know, my idea of Victorian had always been sort of a gothic, everybody's wearing black all the time. You have Queen Victoria in mourning.
Right. Yes.
So I really didn't know what it was about. So I just kind of started researching Gilded Age America, and it was, sort of this wild, fun time. You had everybody going to these public balls and they could get pretty bodies. And you had the Worth gowns, and you had these people making or earning more money than anybody had ever earned at all in the history of the world. And meanwhile, you had a depression going on. And you had the women's rights movement really kicking up. So that's what drew me to Gilded Age, just all these different things sort of combining together. And, I was like, I will never run out of stories to tell there because there are so many.
Felicia, you have also written in quite a few time periods. And one of the reasons that you did this was because your series about the Truitt family was a multi-generational romance series. So we follow this family through the ages. And in Dalliances, we are in the beginning of the Gilded Age. What drew you to write through all of those? Because when I think of that, I think so much research. I think we all know how much research we have to do for any of these books to keep one toe in not necessarily historical accuracy, but at least in the time period. So that sounds like an amazing amount of research.
I grew up liking elderly people. I like thinking of people in different stages of their lives. So I like thinking of people both as they are now and as they were before. Like my father was really involved in our synagogue, and he would be doing his thing. And when I was very little, he would like sort of sit me with elderly people to just sort of watch me. And I was one of those kids who could like sit in a dress and be really little and listen to people talk. And I love that. So I love seeing the same characters in different stages of their life. And I love writing that. Actually, the Truitt series I conceived initially in the early 20th century and then went back to write Appetites, which was the 1840s. But I also set it in my home, a lot of it in and around my hometown of Wilmington, Delaware, which is, I grew up around a lot. This is the beginning of the era I grew up around. Like, I grew up in the Rockford Park area. Rockford Park was built in 1889. So like when I'm pulling from for the accuracy and things are things like Winterthur and Hagley and stuff. So I've seen bits and pieces. I grew up with bits and pieces of Delaware history going on school trips and with my parents and things forever and ever. So I already had a base. It's this home, and it's the story of home.
One of the reasons that it always comes up when I talk about, historical romance that are a little bit unique and different in the genre is because it follows a Jewish family.
Yes.
And they had, I just found this whole series so fascinating. I just ate it up. Because their life, their circle, their social circle was the same in some respects, but much different in other respects from what else was going on in the Gilded Age or, in any of those eras.
Yeah, and they're definitely a little bit, writing American Jews is always interesting because you're always, in a way, especially in this era, because you didn't have a pretty critical mass of Jews in the United States until after 1881. So these are all exceptions, and the communities were small. And besides having less restrictions and where you could live and things like that than in the European communities, you had more social. You've always sort of had more social mixing. So those early families sort of created for the later people who came, even though there were just a small amount of them, sort of the basis of American Jewish culture, which sort of developed in that part of the 19th century at the same time as, I would say, a lot of what the mistakes and the good stuff that brought us where we are today in the United States also comes out of that era. Because the Gilded Era is such a messy, messy, messy era.
Absolutely.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the messiness?
So Dalliances is it's set in 1871, which is the most hopeful year of Reconstruction. So that's when the Klan Act was passed, which is still, if I say, was the initial real centerpiece of the Reconstruction era, and it was still effective. And it looked like there was some momentum to building something different post-Civil War. That obviously does not happen, but it is where it looks like there can be some real radical change. And there are a lot of fits and starts in that period where there looks like there can be radical change, and there are some movements forward. but then you'll start to see like the anti-union behavior coming in the 1880s, like the real union busters and things like that, as well as, again, the end of how Reconstruction died, like basically before it could really fully realize what it was doing. And you also will start to see the problems with like unregulated labor, as well as some really big conservative movements coming into the 1870s. You're going to see Comstock, and you're going to start to see the rise of the temperance leagues and things like, and what they're connected to as well, where they're interesting in that they're connected to some stuff that we assume that we believe is very progressive, but also some stuff that's very conservative at the same time. And it's just a really interesting, both exciting and sort of frustrating period.
And Harper, your series is set in London because that phenomena, I'll let you describe the phenomena that sends your American heroines to England.
Okay, so after the Civil War into the 1870s, you had all these families who were getting super wealthy from the industrial age, from railroads, steel. You had like beer breweries, all these manufacturing endeavors. And so the problem, though, was especially in New York, but in other cities as well, you had the old society people, like the Astors, who were in New York and sort of the top people in society, were not letting these new money families in, as they called them. Yeah. At one point, I think Miss Astor said something like, there had to be 3 generations from where the money was initially earned before, it was acceptable. Yeah. So you had all these people, but not really being accepted in sort of the upper crust society at the time. Unfortunately, we have these men and women and the disparities there. A lot of times men could marry daughters of these families if they were wealthy enough, but the women could not marry the sons of these families in particular. So over a period of about 30 years or so, 40 years maybe, you had these heiresses marrying into European aristocracy. You had it in France, Portugal, Spain, and especially, Britain, where my books are set. So they were called cash for class marriages, because at that time in England, agriculture was going by the wayside, and that's how all of the lords at that time and the dukes had these giant estates, but people were not farming as much anymore. They were moving into the cities, so they were losing money on rents. At that point, you could even bring in grain and things like that cheaper than you could produce it in England. So they just didn't have as much money as they used to. So they could marry an American and bring in a couple $1 million to refill their coffers. So that's what my books are about, these women going over there with their families, some of them willingly, some of them not so willingly, to marry these, dukes and earls for cash for class.
That's amazing. And I remember too, Harper, I think on one of your Facebook posts or your blog post, you talked about Consuela Vanderbilt.
Consuela Vanderbilt. Yeah. She's one of the most famous of these heiresses, because the Vanderbilts were a new money family. Alva Vanderbilt was her mom. She wanted to make it in New York society, and she was from actually Mobile, Alabama. I'm from Alabama. But they lost all their money before the Civil War and during the Civil War, and they spent a lot of time in France, and then her family ended up in New York, sort of penniless. So she had this big chip on her shoulder, and she married a Vanderbilt, and she found out, she was set money-wise, and she had all these houses, but she just could not break into the upper crust of New York society. She finally did eventually, but that still wasn't good enough for her. She had a daughter, and pretty much from the time Consuelo was born. She had personal tutors. She was not allowed really to mingle with kids her age of her social class because her mom was sort of saving her for something better. And there's one story that she had to wear this back brace that came all the way up and buckled under her neck, under her chin, to help her posture. And when you see portraits of her, she just has that posture with the elongated neck.
Oh, wow.
And so her mom had planned this marriage from the time she was born, and she ended up marrying a duke. He wasn't a lot older than her, but he had no interest in her. She had no interest in him. She was in love with someone else, and they ended up marrying. And it was a disaster. I think they got divorced about 20 years later in the early 20th century. And she wrote an autobiography at some point later in her life about it. So she's a really famous one.
And tell me, Joanna, about your experience. You started out writing Regency romance and then went to Gilded Age. So I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about that time hop, why you did it, what it is about the Gilded Age that attracted you, and a little bit of an overview of some of your series.
Yeah, so I grew up reading Edith Wharton. I know a lot of romance authors grow up on Jane Austen, but that was not my experience. I didn't read Austen until I was in my 30s. It just was not. It just never crossed my path. But I loved Edith Wharton. That's where I started, and so I fell in love with the time period, the opulence of it. I had relatives that came through Ellis Island, so I feel like I have that connection to the time period and the whole New York City. So for me, I never wanted to write Regency. I wrote Regency begrudgingly because I didn't think a publisher would take a risk on a Gilded Age series right out of the gate. So I thought, okay, well, Regency is popular, so I will write a Regency and hopefully find a publisher that will take a risk on a Gilded Age series. And that's what happened. I wrote the first series. The Regencies, they were happy with them. Kensington said, what do you want to do next? I said, well, have you ever heard of the Gilded Age? And they said no. This book really, for me, it's called Megan McKinney's Lions and Lace. This book was an old school Gilded Age romance that I read in the early 90s that was really transformative for me because it took what I knew of Edith Wharton and my own experiences of the Gilded Age and that time period and really put it into a romance, which for me was transformative. I mean, I reread it at least every year. The hero is one of my all-time favorites, Trevor Sheridan. He's like a Wall Street wizard. They call him the Predator. It opens with the hero having ruined the heroine's family in revenge, and her uncle takes her to the hero's house and handcuffs her to the railing of the hero's house and says, you ruined our family. She's your problem now. So that's how this book opens. It's absolutely delightful. So when I read that, I was like, that is what I want to do. That is the ultimate goal. So just to backtrack, so then I knew a publisher would not, nobody was really writing anything Gilded Age at the time. And so I wrote the Regency series with the idea of sliding in the next series as Gilded Age. Kensington did take a risk and decided to give me the next series as a Gilded Age series. It did not do well. But I think it got noticed, but it didn't sell. And I think my editor at the time, I actually saw him go out to the Twitterverse, like, dear Twitter, if I told you that a book was set in America in the late 19th century, what would you call it? Like they didn't really even know how to market it. So it just was really, we tried something different with the covers, which was in hindsight a big mistake. And they wanted me to go back to Regency after that. And fair. I mean, based on the numbers, fair. I get it. And then Avon thought, well, let us take a swing at it. I think the time is right for the market to maybe give it a try. So then Avon wanted to take a swing at it, and it seems to have maybe picked up a little more steam. The first series, the goal was to have British women come to America to end up with American tycoons, because American tycoons are my jam. And I definitely wanted to do that, but they wanted to bring like the British women in so that it would give readers who love that Regency feel like something familiar. So that was the concept of the first series.
What eventually, Joanna, do you think changed that publishers were willing to take a chance on Gilded Age? Because you tried it, they said it didn't go well, they wanted you to do Regency again. Was it just your reputation? They're like, okay, let's give Gilded Age a go. What exactly changed? What stars aligned that they're like, oh, let's do it, and then it started to pick up more momentum?
It really was a fluke thing.
Okay.
And it wouldn't have happened without Tessa Woodward at Avon, who was a huge Gilded Age fan. A lot of her authors, she does a lot of historical fiction. And she said to me, one of my best-selling books is I think it's a nonfiction about the Vanderbilt family. I might be getting that wrong, but she was like, listen, one of my biggest selling titles, we don't even market it because it just like sells and we don't have to do anything, is, this historical fiction about the Gilded Age. She was like, I love that time period. I loved what you did. And, I can't wait for more. And I said, well, there aren't going to be any more, but, thanks for letting me know, they want me to go back to Regency. And she said, well, if that's the case, please, please, please have your agent call me. Like, I want to do it. And so it was very much me being at a conference, her approaching me, talking about the series, me saying, well, there aren't going to be any more. And, it just was very much happenstance. It would not have happened without Tessa, because she loves the time period.
Felicia and Harper, did you have any pushback from publishers when you mentioned the time period you wanted to write? Now, I noticed, Felicia, your books, there's a subcategory that says, it calls it Victorian romance. So I was wondering, was that your publisher's way of letting you write Gilded Age, but kind of making it more palatable? And Harper, yours is technically, it's set in Britain. Was that kind of like, they'll allow you to write Gilded Age as long as it's set overseas? Like, were those things that you had to do to make sure that you were able to write those time periods?
I would say I was hard to market. I was just, because it was different. I have no idea how those books even sold, because it was different and different. It was the Jewish thing and the American thing and the different time period thing. And they definitely struggled to market those books. Generally, it's hard to, and I know there was not a plan. And I know that afterwards there's a lot of, it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to market, especially when you're different in a lot of other categories. I know there's a lot of hesitation because you can maybe slide in different in Regency, or you could maybe do sort of same default characters in a different era. But I think it's very, very complicated. I think for marketing teams, they're very scared to do both, and they're not always 100% sure what they're doing. Also, the Truitt books came out during a kind of big overhaul at Harlequin, and the head of Carina at the time kind of left by surprise a month before Dalliances came out. That's always the story of publishing. There's always other stuff also going on underneath the surface too.
Right.
That it
right.
has nothing to do with the books, even that has to do with just a whole other host of people and places and everybody, because you're working with real people who have all kinds of other different stuff that they answer to.
Right. Harper?
I had the idea for the Dollar Princesses who had married the Dukes and the Earls, and I took it to my agent. I said, I want to write about these women, but can I set it in New York where the Duke comes and courts the heiress here, or do I have to put it in London? And she was like, no, definitely you have to put it in London, because we want to bring in those Regency readers who are used to the ballroom scenes and they want the London atmosphere. So before we even went out to publishers, that's what she was telling me to do.
America is the problem. It seems like people don't want to read about
but what's
anything in
interesting,
America.
what's interesting is that it's not a problem in historical fiction. It really is just limited to romance, which is why it's so interesting to me. I mean, it's, you know, the American set historical fiction market is booming.
So let me ask then, I wanted to ask all three of you specifically about the heroes, because of the time, because the Gilded Age, there's so much excess, right? And I've set my books in the 1840s, and there are a lot of parallels between the 1840s, Victorian England, and now. But in the Gilded Age, there's so many more. I mean, we had our own gilded president, do you know what I mean, who lived in a literal gilded home. There's so many parallels, and you have these heroes, right? You have these men during the time who are lionized for being capitalists, like that was the good thing. And so now, if you're trying to rate these romances as they really were, like, and Joanna, I mean, the way you thread the needle is amazing, but I'm wondering too if you get pushback, or if you think that it's partly that romance readers who are predominantly women are falling, like, don't connect necessarily with those American heroes because it's too close to home. It's so much easier to imagine a Duke is progressive and wonderful and warm and caring. All he has to do is fall off his horse, right? As opposed to imagining that a tycoon, someone who has built up this massive amount of wealth, could also be the same way. I'm gonna start with you, Joanna, because your heroes are such a mix.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, when I switched from Regency to Gilded Age, I was at a conference and a reader came up to me and said, when are you going to go back to Regency? Like, and I said, well, I don't know. Hopefully, you know, I probably said hopefully never, but she said, oh, because I won't read the American stuff, but when you go back to Regency, I'll read it. And I kind of said, well, I hope you give the American stuff a try. I mean, it's very similar. It's, you know, it's everything you know and love, like just in a different, but I think we as Americans are so conditioned, you know, we think, oh, I sat through American history class since kindergarten, like enough already. I know all there is to know about American history. I'm full of American history, which of course now I think in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, the majority of Americans have realized that is not true. That's not the case. We know a very slim, you know, filtered view of American history. So I think it's just feeling like it's too close to home. It's they can't romanticize it because we feel like we know it so well. That's been my experience.
So Felicia, your series not only is set during this time where we have this aggregation of wealth, but it also has the added facets of ethnicity and religion put into it. Did you ever get feedback from readers that they would have enjoyed the series more if it had not been American set, if it had been further removed?
I always get feedback that again, I feel like people don't know American history. They have this image of American history as everybody like pre-20th century was in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and that is what all Americans were like until sometime in the 20th century. Because I get a lot of feedback like that seems like that, like, oh, this isn't accurate because that Americans were extremely conservative and dressed very simply, and I'm like, okay, but I think they're willing to suspend a little. I think the issue isn't the Jewish stuff necessarily. I think that confuses people because it's a lot, but I have been I tend to write a lot of heroes that tend to have less money than the heroines.
Yeah.
And that I think is hard for a certain set of readers. Dalliances is a big one with that because he's a recent immigrant with no money. And then he's got a whole, and I think people suspended their belief for his entire set of values because he's coming from Eastern Europe and is very clearly influenced by a lot of the radical socialist movements there coming into the United States. So I think they're okay with, like, they can believe that those are sort of his beliefs, but I think there are for some readers, they're not as attracted to a hero who doesn't necessarily have, even though they don't say it that way. And it's weird too, because they're also uncomfortable with wealth that you make. It's that inherited wealth that I think a lot of readers are more comfortable, which is so weird because it's so un-American, right? Because we're supposed to be the opposite of that. We're supposed to be the mythical American dream is anyone can make it here. You don't have to have these pure bloodlines and stuff that you saw back in Europe and places in England, but somehow that's weirdly attractive, not to all readers, but there's just like a thread of readers that I think still likes some of that fairy tale because it's still somewhere buried in the cultural milieu and psyche and appeals to something.
Harper, so you're taking your heroines and they're American heroines with American values coming, and they're the money that they are bringing the money to heroes who what they have to offer is a status that the heroines weren't even raised to to understand or to believe in or find themselves. So the power balance I found, like especially in the first when I was reading the first book, there's the power balance goes back and forth, right? Because she's a woman, but she's been helping her father's business, but she has no title. But do you know what I mean? Like there are things that go back and forth, but she is the one bringing the money. Were you thinking about those conundrums when you were writing those books?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I had her be so involved in her family's business, because I needed her to have some sort of autonomy where she wasn't just going to go over there, marry him, and then she's the lady of the castle who stays on this dilapidated estate. I wanted her to have some agency. And so that was a big problem, and it's something I face every time. I do think there's this fantasy element that readers who I do have international readers, but a lot of my readers are here in America. They want to be swept away by the guy in the castle and the Duke or the Earl, although the Duke is, I don't know why Duke in the title is just something that people like more.
Cha-ching, you just
Yeah.
So, he's not a prince, but he's just under a prince. So there's that fantasy, that being swept away, and then they get to live in this castle, and the money is less important because you have him giving her autonomy, asking her opinion on things, and not just telling her how it's going to be, and they work it out together. So but yeah, it was definitely challenging in the start.
Is there a freedom in writing about a period in time that people know less about than, let's say, Regency and Victorian? Like, are you able to get away with things? You're like, oh, they'll never know. They don't know because they don't even know what Gilded Age really means. Like, although now I'm guessing there are more people who are learning about it, but is there a certain freedom to writing about a time where people are maybe less picky about the details, or are they just picky no matter what you do? I don't know. Harper, you're already shaking your head. What?
They're going to take something out. You know, in my case, it's usually the women are ahead of their time or the men are too progressive. And I'm like, you know, you had these women in the women's rights movement, and a lot of them were married. They did have husbands supporting them, you know, so just because you don't necessarily hear about the husbands doesn't mean they were not progressive. You know, there were progressive men back there. So I often get picked at on the social issues and things like that.
Okay. Joanna?
I will say that the Regency readers, because Regency has been so dominant for so long, they really feel like they are all experts on the Regency. And I mean, definitely when I wrote that Regency series, I was terrified because I just thought, I don't know any of that. I did my research obviously for the books, but like, I don't know it as well as probably the average Regency reader, which is why I wanted to get out of that era and write what I know, which is Gilded Age. So for me, yes, there is definitely a freedom both in the language, because I don't know the Britishisms. So for me, like, to avoid that altogether is probably better for everybody. But the fun in it for me is because nobody knows it, I can go in and find a little obscure nugget, a party, a movement, an event, I can find some thing, a place, and I can build a plot point around that. And I really try to blow readers' minds with, yes, there really was a party on horseback on the second floor of a restaurant. And, everybody ate off saddle trays, and, what the waiters were dressed as grooms, that kind of thing is really fun for me because readers don't know it. So I feel like I get to expose them to something new.
Right. I remember you're mentioning the whole horseback party when I interviewed you a couple of years ago. That still stays with me. And didn't they give all these extravagant party favors? Like, did they give an elephant or an ostrich or some animal? Was there an animal exchanged at one point?
Not an animal. I mean, they had them at parties where they would have swans.
Okay. They just had them
on a table, swans,
okay.
Around that table or
exotic butterflies. Yeah, there was a little, it was a table, and they had like a little trench dug out for the water for the swans to swim around. They flew in butterflies from South America, to release, and P.S. all the butterflies died. That's, at parties they would give away, $100 bills and diamond bracelets and, Tiffany jewelry, and all that kind of stuff is real.
Yeah. You see, now that versus a ball in London, I'd rather go to the place with the spectacle, which is what's happening in New York.
$100 bills, y'all.
Yeah, the $100. And back then, $100 bill was worth what? Like $1 million? Like, I don't know. Like, what was it actually worth? It's worth more than
$100. The rule is
100.
times 20.
Is that what it is? Is that the rule?
I mean, it's hard to be accurate, but that's sort of in general times 20.
That's good to know. Felicia, same question to you. Like, is there a freedom, or is there a fun? Is there a satisfaction in writing about an era and a people that many people don't know much about at that time?
I mean, so it's give and take. Again, you always have the readers who are who really don't understand that that Jewish culture isn't like proto-Christianity, that like even like the biblical stuff, 99% of what Christians interpret things as is completely different than Jews do. So we're quiet about it because we don't want to like upset people. But so I'll get things like these family's attitude on sex is, and why isn't anybody talking about people going to hell and stuff like that? Because it's completely culturally that kind of stuff, and that is, I think, jarring for people. Though I will say, one of the things, like in Dalliances and some of the later books I've liked, like in Appetites, Ursa's family is Sephardi Jewish, but they've been in England, and then they've been in England and Amsterdam, so they're not like in Greece, so they wouldn't speak Ladino. So I couldn't put like that in. But anytime I have an Ashi character, I can put in, instead of cursing in English, I can curse in Yiddish. And I find that very freeing, because readers are sort of like with like, or like expletives and like sort of like interjections and stuff, where that stuff I can do pretty easily, and you won't get like the nitpicky language stuff there. So I try with those characters to put a lot of that stuff in, just because it alternates my word choice. But like what's a freedom is that, like, when I was writing Dalliances, I've been to every place in Dalliances. I've stayed at Bedford Springs, the resort there that existed. I know the lot where the B&O was and where the Pennsylvania Railroad was. I've been to Gettysburg multiple times. Every piece of furniture in both those in the Truitt books is in Winterthur that I just described. So I've seen all that stuff. So I'm much more confident in that. Like even the natural stuff, the outdoor stuff, I've seen it all. So I'm pretty confident in what I'm describing, because I've touched and lived that stuff.
When I was doing the research for Secret Scientists, I come across when you go down the research rabbit hole and you're like, oh my God, and you spend 17 hours finding out if it's one person, you can't put them in the book, you can't do anything with it, and they just sit there in the back of your brain forever. For when you were researching the Gilded Age, and especially you, Felicia, because I know that this whole series was set in your hometown and close to your heart, was there someone that you came across during the research that just popped out at you that you maybe haven't inserted in your books, but they're always going to live in your head rent free?
I would say, so when researching Dalliances, there's a lot of women and men in the divorce movement in the United States in the mid-19th century that I want to do more on, because I only touched the surface on that. Like the fact that Indianapolis was like the Reno of the US in the late 19th century is fascinating to me, and there are a lot of and I didn't get to touch on that a lot. However, I did as a child, because I went on a ranger tour with my parents to Gettysburg as a child, and they talked about Governor Warren on the second day of Gettysburg, when that was almost lost on the second day. He was standing on the top of a little big top cursing. They talked about him being the most profane man in the Union Army. I knew I had to put him in, even in a flashback, because he had lived in my head rent-free for about 20 years before I could work him into a book. And all that happened on that second day, because we talked about Pickett's charge on the third day when it was won, but it was almost lost on the second day because they almost didn't hold that hill.
So you said that Indianapolis used to be the Vegas?
The Reno, the divorce capital. They had very lax divorce laws in Indiana, the first in the country. So people would go and like establish quasi-residence in Indiana for a brief period of time to get divorced.
Wow. Harper, Joanna, did you know that? And could you set something in India? Oh, you did. So are you going to move some that to be a setting? Come on.
How's that going to be romantic?
No, I've mentioned Reno, characters either wanting to go to Reno or, if I'm not mistaken, I think Reno didn't have the residency law. So if you could get to Reno, you could get a divorce faster. But if you couldn't get to Reno, then you could get to Indiana. I could be wrong about that.
Well, that could be a quirky road trip where they're, traveling there, and on the way they fall in love and they're like, maybe we shouldn't get divorced. They fall in love again. I'm just spitballing ideas.
You need to write that.
Okay.
So, Joanna, is there someone that you've come across in your research that's lived in your head from this time that you probably will never put in a book, but you're going to carry with you?
Well, I may put it in a book. Let's put it that way. So, New York obviously was a very busy harbor, international harbor. The harbor was very dangerous. There was obviously a lot of, taverns and saloons up and down the waterfront. There was a woman who was basically a bouncer at one of these riverfront saloons, and she was feared up and down the New York harbor. The reports I've said has said she was 6'1", 6'2". Her name was they called her Galus Mag. Galus, Gallus, was another word for suspenders, which she wore every day. She wore trousers and suspenders. So they called her Galus Mag. She used to bite the ears off unruly patrons, and she would store them in a jar behind the bar. This woman, clearly you would not want to tussle with her. So obviously very tough, very feared. She had a rivalry supposedly with a female river pirate named Sadie the Goat, Sadie, Sadie the Goat. And I don't know a lot about Sadie, but I know that, she kind of had her own crew of river pirates that used to go up and down and steal, in the Hudson and the East River. I'm not sure which one. So those two are sort of, those two I always think about a lot.
Okay, now I'm thinking about them.
Yeah, the river pirate thing is fascinating.
Yeah.
River pirates?
River pirates.
Whoa.
The other one that lives in my head is, and I forget her name, but one of the biggest fences in New York City in the Gilded Age was a woman. So where you would take your stolen goods and she would either, buy them from you or find you another seller. That was a woman, and her name is escaping me, but yeah.
Okay, Harper, top that.
Yeah.
I can't top that. She should have gone last. There's a few people. There's Miriam Leslie, who she was married to, I think his name was Frank. It was Frank Leslie Publishing. He was the biggest publisher in America at the time, and he died, and she ended up taking over his company. She ran it. She was the first, female publisher of a publisher and company that size at the time. And he had millions of dollars. She grew this company and then left it all to the women's rights movement. And a lot of people say the 19th Amendment passed because of the money she left. So I would love to incorporate her more. There's also a story that I read. I think about it every week. I go to the newspapers of the time, and there's like police blotters, what's happening. And there was this story of this guy. He goes to the police station in New York, and he's like, this woman owes me $5,000 for guiding her across the country from San Francisco, but she won't pay up. So he takes the police with him back to this hotel, and they get there, and the room she's in, it's a very nice hotel room, is empty. And so they go get the hotel manager and open the safe. And instead of all the money she supposedly had, she left a pile of birdseed. And I'm like, why birdseed? And what was going on with that couple? So I just want to write a scene where everyone leaves a pile of birdseed.
Yeah, where did she get all that birdseed?
And why was it significant?
Am I asking the wrong question? I don't know.
I don't know. But I think about that all the time. And also, why $5,000 to guide her from San Francisco to New York? I mean, this is the Transcontinental Railroad was here at that time. So there's a lot more to that story.
I love this stuff. And I love all of you, all of your work. I'm so grateful that you guys came on to talk about this, because I don't think it's highlighted enough. And I don't think that people understand how much research goes into all of this. I feel like by now we're all very comfortable with the Regency, even if we haven't researched it, because we've read so many Regencies because that's like the bulk, the mainstay of historical romance. So when you do branch out, you do an enormous amount of research, and that's one of my favorite things about historical romance set in times other than the Regency is what you'll find out. I just wanted to say how much I appreciated in this last book the discussion around the Comstock Act, because they're talking about reviving it. So,
It's really, I mean, talk about blowing my mind. With everything we know, everything we've been through, here we are again, trying to restrict, access to reproductive information. I mean, it's absolutely bananas.
do you want to just give a brief overview of the act and explain why it's pertinent now?
What we see happen in the Gilded Age, we see wealth concentrated at the top. We see all of these immigrants coming in. We see Black people now getting rights. We see women now wanting rights. And it really becomes this movement of white nationalism that really rises up after the Civil War into Reconstruction, where they try to roll everything back. They try to contain as much as they can. I mean, it's so similar to what is happening now that it's truly, truly frightening. And it's all driven by this white nationalism movement, which in the Gilded Age was called eugenics, because they came up with a fancy term for it. It was this social Darwinism. And one of the things that comes out of it is this effort to restrict abortion, which was perfectly legal, seen as a medical procedure throughout the early 19th century. And enter in Comstock, who was a postal inspector, who was a religious zealot, who gets caught up in this movement. So anything that was viewed obscene could not be sent in the mail. And then it becomes twisted into this, that includes contraceptives, that includes advice on your marriage, that includes, stuff from doctors even telling you how to prevent pregnancy, all kinds of women's reproductive care, anything. It just became this very broad umbrella for what constituted obscenity. And Comstock really led the charge. He had all kinds of support within the government. And it's really a movement of eugenics, even Teddy Roosevelt at one point said white women need to do their duty. I mean, they were very much, we want to control, we need more white babies is where that really all stems from. And unfortunately, a lot of the Comstock stuff lives on into like the 1920s, 1930s, because that's when eugenics really gets in full swing. And as we see what the rise, where that eugenics led, which was the rise of Nazi Germany. So it's terrifying. There's a lot of undercurrents and parallels to what we're seeing now that really worry me.
I finished the book, and then I think it was maybe a month later, I saw a reference to Comstock laws being revived. And I thought, oh my gosh, your head must be exploding it right now, because here we are talking about history, talking about historical fiction, and we're talking about American history, but we're not.
So my heroine in The Duke Gets Even is thwarting the Comstock laws by holding, because you couldn't even, then it became you can't mail it and you can't talk about it in public. You can't hold meetings. You can't even pass out information in public or private. I mean, they just really, it got to be really just like overzealous. And so my heroine is thwarting the Comstock laws by holding private, where women buy contraceptives from her, and she shows them how to use them, and she ends up getting arrested for it. So that was, and I have been wanting to work in abortion care and contraceptives, all that Comstock stuff into a book at some point. That has been in the back of my mind really since I started writing in this era. And I just needed the right heroine to do it with. And this was, I mean, she was obviously the one. So
yeah, because the book that's coming out in 2024 for me is the first of a new series. It's a spinoff series, and it features a woman apothecary, and part of the plot is that she provides abortion care. And the revisions, I just got revisions back in it's a fine line, because you don't hit people over the head and be like, we're screwed. Look at, people women in the 1840s had more autonomy than we do now. But on the other hand, when it comes to abortion care, you want to be, you want to put it in context. You want it to be thoughtful. There's all sorts of places people find themselves on the spectrum when it comes to abortion care, and you want to be generous and be graceful. And that's not something that it's easy to do in this culture. And it's especially not something easy to do in romance right now, because, it's very difficult to be nuanced.
I was really ready for angry emails and letters, and I have not gotten one. But I have gotten emails from people saying, thank you for, writing about that. There was a professor from like somewhere in middle America, Kansas or something, wrote to me and said, I just finished the book, and I'm so glad you wrote about this, and it's fascinating, and here's my context for why. But I have not gotten one angry email. So
that's awesome.
Felicia, I believe you might be jumping time periods again, going backwards, right? I think
backwards and across the pond. I have a England set, 1830s. So it's gonna be called a Regency, even though, because Victoria's not on the throne yet, even though it's not technically in the Regency. But that is what it will be called. It's Marry Me by Midnight. It is a Cinderella retelling. It is set in the East End of London, in that Jewish community there. And it is coming out August 8th, 2023 from Forever. It will be the first in a series. Second in the series is coming out in 2024 and now has a title. That's why I'm like, I'm so excited I can say that. That's Wake Me Most Wickedly. So those are the first two in the Once Upon the East End series.
so. Each one is going to be a fairy tale retelling. Oh, fun. Nice. Harper, what do you have coming up?
So I have on May 23rd, the fourth book in my Gilded Age Heiresses series, and it'll be the last book. It's about Camille, who, in the first book in the series, it opens with her getting married to this much older duke. She's crying. She doesn't want to marry him. And so she's sort of the cautionary tale for my heiresses in the book. They're like, well, you don't want to marry these men. Like, what happens? And he's not very nice to her. So fortunately, I killed him off at some point. And so she's getting her happily ever after in book 4.
Awesome. Now, you said this is the last in the series. Will your next series, do you think, continue in the Gilded Era or no?
Yeah, it's sort of similar. It's called The Doves of New York, and it's about 3 illegitimate sisters who are looking to, upward mobility in society by marrying titles. So the first book will be out next year, hopefully.
Joanna, what do you have coming up?
So the last book in the Fifth Avenue Rebels series, The Duke Gets Even, just came out at the end of January. I don't have another. I'm working on the next book, which will launch a new series. It's called The Gilded Heiress. It is not going to come out until spring 2024. It is a mix of the Lindbergh Baby, Anastasia, and Pygmalion. The hero is a con man. The heroine is a singer who may or may not be like a lost New York City heiress.
Whoa.
So that's what I'm working on now, but it doesn't come out till next year.
Oh, wow. And then you said the Lindbergh babies in it?
Yeah, it's kind
Okay.
of a little bit of a mashup. So.
Whoa. Thank you, Felicia, Joanna, and Harper, for sharing your insights and opinions on Unchaperoned. And thank you to our viewing audience. Be sure to subscribe and join us next month when we discuss historical romance reader feedback with another panel of unchaperoned historical romance authors.